Good afternoon. Welcome to Weather God's Wisdom, where we talk about tropics and sometimes severe weather if I'm feeling like it. Anyway, we're not going to be talking about severe weather today. We're going to be talking about Tropical Depression 1, that is here in the Atlantic, just to the east of Florida, which is right here, obviously. It is drifting to the northeast right now. This is the official forecast graphic from the National Hurricane Center that just came out. It is expected to pass close to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It could actually come on shore, according to some models. And this forecast is an extrapolation between two very different forecasts. The UK Met and Euro are more offshore here on day 2 than the GFS and CMC, which both bring this practically onshore. And we will be discussing both possibilities and why they are happening. So let's get into that. And we'll be talking about Tropical Storm Amphan here in a minute. But for now, let's talk about this system. Okay, so let's start where we're at right now. This system has just closed off and is kind of symmetric. It will be fluctuating in its convective look, so to speak, and will likely be more east-oriented over the next couple of days because shear is still present and there's still a lot of dry air. If you go back to the actual satellite, you can see there is abundant dry air to the south of it. There's no cumulus clouds here, and so that means there's a lot of sinking air that is going to be drawn into the system if the system is able to reach to these, which it will be now that it is a circulation. So as the system kind of progresses northward, it will be ingesting a lot of dry air in here because the relative humidity values are not very high in these areas. So as it moves to the north, it will be ingesting dry air. You can see this band is ingesting dry air, but as it moves, as it gets away from this area of dry air, there will be a greater moisture plume surrounding the system. And if I can get the humidity up, you can see that this is not as dry as it was. So there is a moisture plume to the east of the system that it will be heading into, and there's some continental dry air that it will draw in, but which will limit any substantial intensification. And obviously the cooler sea surface temperatures for this time of year will be limiting any substantial intensification as well, but it will be intensifying nonetheless because of the sea surface temperatures if it runs into the Gulf Stream at any point. And you can see that the GFS actually brings it on shore here, which is not great news, but we'll see what happens because there are two very different situations being played out right now. So if we go to lower dynamics here, if you look at the 850 millibar vorticity, you can see this is still a very broad system. By the time it reaches just south of the North Carolina coast here, but you can see to the east right here is largely just almost straight north. So you can see that it just is kind of being pushed to the north, and there's not really a lot that is going to be moving this to this northeast until later. And you can see there's kind of a blocking pattern right in here that's like a little bit of a ridge that is developed and will kind of be eroded. It's not enough to like block it and just throw it straight into the North Carolina coast, but it does keep it relatively close to the coast. So as this kind of moves up, you can see there's a trough that's in here that brings this system offshore. It does actually get pretty close to even parts of the mid-Atlantic states, but it does remain offshore in this run. And so the GFS, pretty much the summary of this, is the GFS is making this ridge that is pushing this storm to the north right now. It keeps it around a little longer, and this trough evolves a little slower than the European model. You can actually see on the European model, it's a little stronger, the trough here, and the ridge is a little weaker in here. It's the mean flow is mainly south-southwest, coming out of the south-southwest, so it keeps it offshore. And then this trough kind of moves it out to sea because there's not a ridge that's here that's blocking it, or the ridge is not as strong. And actually, I'm going to get a little broader of a view here, eastern U.S. view. You can see this ridge that is supposed to be blocking it and pushing it into the North Carolina coast is almost non-existent in this run. But if you go to the GFS at the same time, you can see it's much closer, and this ridge is a little stronger in here. Not too much, but it is pushing it to the north rather than to the north and east. And as this kind of moves along, you can see it will eventually get caught up in the jet and kind of flatten out its vorticity. And so it will not be too close, and it will kind of run around this bigger system here that is over the Ohio River Valley, and it will kind of become a pawn of that system rather, and will just put a lot of rain into the northeast if the GFS is right. But if the Euro is right, this system will be very far out to the east, and I'm thinking that there's something in between these two solutions that will probably happen. So I'm thinking that it will probably just run up the coast and get kind of dragged out a little further to the north than the Euro has it, but we'll see. Anyway, regardless, there's probably going to be some rough weather on the Outer Banks, and I mean, the system is not expected to be particularly strong when it is encountering the Outer Banks, but it does run up the coast pretty much, so that would be bad if it does actually indeed follow through with running up the coast. But given the lack of intensity, this would not be a super bad system to run into the Outer Banks. Kind of a warm-up for the main hurricane season, so to speak. But regardless, if you're on the Outer Banks, please do watch this. This does bear watching if you are wanting to go on the beach or go sailing, because you probably won't be if there's a freaking tropical storm on top of you. Anyway, that's all that I have for this system. Now let's move on to Amphan. Amphan is a very large system. It has been organizing throughout the day, and you can see that it is tightening up a little bit in the core of the system. It's a little southerly oriented now because there's a bit of dry air that you can see under this cloud layer in here that is being entrained to the northern part of the system. But regardless, the northerly outflow has really expanded, which has allowed the system to kind of go uninhibited with any shear, so that's good for the system. It's now at 45 knots according to the JTWC, which means that it has winds of 50 miles per hour as it slowly moves to the north and kind of northwest, pretty much north at this point. So let us check the evolution of this system. Okay. Amphan is a very large system, so it will take a while for it to really, really organize. And you can see out on the GFS run, this is a very large system, even at 42 hours out, and at 48 hours out, it is still very large, and it's kind of lopsided because of the amount of dry air that it could ingest, because there's a lot of continental dry air. If you look at hour 0 and check what is kind of a large moisture plume that it is in right now, it is very embedded in this, and so it will not have too much dry air in the way of it. But as this continental dry air line of sorts is ingested due to the large circulation, it could inhibit the intensification of the system. But regardless, it will still be very powerful by the time of 48 hours, because even though it is ingesting dry air, it will still be intensifying regardless. And how intense this gets ultimately is determined by how intense the dry air is that it ingests. But in this run of the GFS, they actually keep it a little weaker for a while, so that's good. But if it does not ingest as much continental dry air, well, or the dry air does not affect it as much, well, we could be dealing with a much stronger system here, and we could be seeing what the HWRF is saying about this system, which is very bad because it ingests dry air, but nonetheless is still intensifying up until landfall and ultimately comes in as a pretty strong Category 4 cyclone in here because it is able to wall off most of the dry air. But given that this is such a large system, it will take a while for it to really intensify, and we could, within the next 18 hours, see a rapid intensification period because it is relatively clear of any dry air, and it does come together pretty fast in this model run, so I'm kind of watching for any sudden rapid intensification that will occur, but throughout the day, this has kind of been just gradually coming together, and the dry air, the continental dry air that you can see on India right now could be getting wrapped into the system later on as it moves northward and separates itself from the monsoon trough that's in here. So, but we will for sure be watching whether or not this system can indeed intensify as much as it is expected to. But most of the intensity forecasts have come down quite a bit from their very high expectations of the system, because yesterday at this time, the HWRF was expecting a 901 millibar system coming into the Ganges Delta, so that's very different from what it is now, which is about 20 millibars weaker. So that's certainly good. However, anything could change, so we will continue to watch the system with very peeled eyes. So anyway, that's all I got for you guys. Just as always, stay safe and have a good rest of your evening.